we go. Okay. The nice part about this chapter is that a lot of this is happening right now. Primary season is going to be coming up here really soon. So a lot of the things that you're going to learn about, you're going to see actually happen in real life over the next few months, which will be helpful a little bit. It's kind of nice that you're taking the AP test on a year like this year, just because government is in the news a lot, and so you just tend to get exposed to a good amount of terms and ideas and issues as you go. So the book starts out kind of talking about who runs, how do candidates come to be in the world of campaigns. We have two groups here. So first is the self-starters. These are people who feel kind of this intrinsic motivation to run for office. So maybe they want to change something in government. Maybe they have just always been really interested in government. They just kind of feel like they can make some change. Now, just be careful. Every candidate is going to tell you they're a self-starter. Every candidate is going to say, oh, I felt like I could change. They're not all self-starters. A lot of them are what we put into the camp of recruited. These are people who have been kind of sought after by an interest group, a political party, and sort of put there and said, hey, you should run, we'll support you. That's kind of the primary way that those things happen, because you don't want to like announce your candidate and then have nobody support you. That's not going to get you very far. So in reality, it's a little bit of both. That you have to be a self-starter enough to believe that you can do it, but you also have to be recruited enough that you can actually get somewhere when you go. So you'll notice candidates will do that a lot. And some just choose not to run because they choose not to run. Like Joe Biden would be a great example of that. He took a lot of time to decide and he ended up not running. Probably not because he wasn't recruited. There'd be a lot of people who would support him, but because for him personally, it just wasn't the thing he wanted to get involved in yet or at all. So the nomination process. One of the things that you would do if this was a comparative politics class is we would compare elections of other countries. The United States is very unique. We have a very unique system. It's very vast, probably because we have a lot of different people in our country. But if you look at other countries, there are some countries that do it really well. There are some countries that don't do it well at all. The election process is actually very important to how well a country runs. If you don't have a good enough election process and corrupt leaders end up becoming leaders of your country, you see a lot of turmoil. So countries that tend to see a lot of revolutions or war, civil war, tend to not have the best nomination processes because they tend to have leaders who aren't, representative of the people or aren't, considered good leaders. So the nomination process depends on what level of government you're going at. At the local level, you just have to fill out a form and you're nominated. At the state level, typically you have a party endorse you. Local leaders typically don't have to be in a party. You don't have to be a Democratic mayor, stuff like that. And then a presidential candidacy has a big nomination process. We'll talk about that a little bit later in the lecture. Who's eligible? Your book goes through really nicely the four main categories of candidates in the national government. So for the president, has to be 35 years old, a natural-born citizen, and a resident of this country for 14 years. The vice president, has to be naturally born, meaning born as a United States citizen, 35 years old, and may not be in the state of the president. So you can't have two, like the vice president from, for instance, if Scott Walker became the president, he's from Wisconsin, he's representing Wisconsin. Paul Ryan couldn't be his vice president because Paul Ryan's also from Wisconsin. So you have to have some differences. And in fact, candidates will choose a vice president who's usually on the other side of the country because they're trying to pull more voters. So they're trying to attract more people. For instance, Barack Obama is from the Illinois area. He's kind of known very well in Midwestern. Joe Biden is a very East Coast candidate. He spends a lot of time in the East Coast region. His family has a lot of property there, and so they kind of combine it to get some more voters throughout the geographic regions. Who runs? Typically white males run. We're starting to see women more and more as candidates, and they're going higher in different offices. Typically women were only candidates in state offices for a pretty long time. Slowly that gets a little bit more. Now we're seeing more in the House of Representatives, which is considered the lower house of Congress. Now we're seeing more in the Senate, and we have 2 women running for the office of presidency in this campaign cycle. So we're starting to see women grow in their positions in government. If you want some numbers, in 2014, 182 women ran for Congress, House of Representatives and Senate, and 81 were elected. So, sort of some figures there. The other thing, women as candidates, you should know this organization is called Emily's List. Your book mentions it. Emily's List is sort of considered an interest group. They support financially and with resources women who are running. So that's Emily's List, and they typically support liberal women candidates. That's kind of their leaning, but I'm sure they would support a conservative woman if they felt like it was necessary. Emily's List is really well known. If you're supported by Emily's List, it typically means you're a pretty legitimate candidate. Some graphs that are in your book, just kind of showing that growth that women have been having. Like one of the things you need to notice here is the gap between how many candidates and how many win. We're kind of closing that gap a little bit, where we're starting to see, the amount of women who run and the amount of women who win becoming similar. Part of the problem with this gap is because we know that incumbents tend to have an advantage, and all of the incumbents were males because males were holding all of the offices. And so not only do women have to overcome the fact that they're women and considered kind of a minority group, they also have to fight against an incumbent. And we know that that's much harder to do. So we're starting to see these things rise because now women are getting into those offices, they're running again, and they're winning those seats again. Okay, the changing campaign. So let's talk about the 21st century campaign. And like I told the first group, even as we talk about this, the 21st century campaign is changing. 50 years ago, like Ronald Reagan or I'm trying to think of it, like John F. Kennedy, they would look at the campaign that's happening right now and probably roll over in their graves. This is not the way a presidential campaign has ever been done before. Campaigns used to be very appropriate. You were very put together, you held your tongue, you said appropriate things, you didn't speak your mind all the time, it was very calculated, very controlled. That is not this campaign. This campaign is very brash, it's very personal, it's very open, it's 24 hours a day, and so it's really changing the way that we see campaigns. There's a lot less of this formality and more of this casual, sort of piece. It's becoming a tad more negative, and part of that's because we're being more partisan. So we attack both parties very regularly. Whereas before, sometimes candidates would run they call it like a never negative campaign, where they would never attack their opponent. And they're doing that because they want you to see them as the positive candidate. Nowadays, you can't really avoid it. So that will really change. Some of the other things, social media has really changed the way we see campaigns. It is a big deal. It's a big, media network. So let's talk a little bit about some of the campaign staff that you'll see. A political consultant. This is a paid professional. Typically, that's a team hired to devise a campaign strategy. And that comes down to those smallest things. What hotel does the candidate stay in? Does he walk down the street? Does he get in a car? Is the car, normal? Is the car a black Suburban? When they get to the facility, do they do a question and answer session? Does he or she just do a speech? How long is the speech? What is he wearing? What's in the background? All of those things are considered by a political consultant. They're sort of the game planner. A political consultant has a lot of say. A candidate typically does whatever the political consultant says to do, but they also get a lot of the blame. So I gave this example in the first group. again, it doesn't matter your political leaning, but we know the political consultants for the candidate Jeb Bush have gotten a lot of flack in the last few months because Jeb Bush is a very strong candidate, but he's been playing defense. So people have been coming at him and he's reacting to what they say as opposed to coming out in front of the issue and sort of being the first one to talk about it. He's like the last one to talk about it. And they've been really firing at his political consultants to say, what kind of campaign are you running? Because he's not starting to look as strong as he should, essentially. Finance chairperson is huge. Obviously, you got to manage where you're putting your money. So they'll talk a lot in, we're putting this money in Iowa, we're putting this money in Wisconsin, we're putting this money in Ohio. They're doing that because that's like how much media they're going to buy, that's how many visits they're going to spend, and they move that money all around. If there's a state that they know they're not going to win, they're going to move all that money out of there, they're going to go to a state they think they can win. And the finance chairperson decides all of those things. It's a very stressful job. The communications director manages all of the message that the candidate talks about. When are they talking about immigration? When are they talking about education? How are they going to talk about it? What kind of image is the president giving? Is he sort of this everyday, you and me sort of style? Is he more formal? And that even comes down to the communication director often chooses the venues. Is he going to talk in a cafe in Iowa? Is he going to talk in an arena? Is he going to go to an auditorium? Is he going to stand on a stage? Is he going to stand in a group? Notice this. This is really interesting if you study campaigns. If you've been watching, Trump has been campaigning on a stage. There's no one behind him. It's usually like an American flag or a background. Hillary Clinton has been campaigning in the round. She stands in the middle of the room and they fill it all around her. What they're trying to do, that's an image. They're trying to bring Hillary Clinton kind of down to an everyday person life. She's traveling in a van across Iowa, making you believe that Hillary Clinton has enough money, she could fly a private jet anywhere in the world at any given time. But no one wants to elect a president like that. They want to elect someone who kind of understands our life. So she does a lot of these where she's just with people, she's around people, whereas Trump's communications director has decided that he wants to be a more formal candidate. He wants to be more outward here as opposed to just around them. All of those decisions are done by his campaign staff. Everything is very, very, very calculated, down to the people who ask the questions of the question and answer session. They pick the people they want to ask those questions. Press secretary deals with all the media, so lets them know when a candidate is going to be speaking, if they can ask them questions, press releases, briefings, things like that. There's a press secretary for the campaign, and then obviously there's a press secretary for the president, and they brief every day to the press. Okay, the strategy of winning, the big one, visibility. If you are not a visible candidate, you will not win. So that's the main thing on everybody's mind in these campaigns. How can we get our candidate into the media? How can we get them on the front page of the paper? How can we get them in the first 2 minutes of the evening news? How can we get people to see him and be available? That's why they use social media a lot. It's why we have this really interesting facet of campaigns. We know after studying this that the American people, when they start to see a candidate very regularly, they start to believe that that candidate is the best candidate for the job, which is really crazy to me because just because you see a candidate every day doesn't necessarily mean that a candidate fits your views. But when you look at it, think about who are the candidates that you've seen on the news or in the paper or on the internet every day. You see Trump, you see Hillary Clinton. Who are the people who have the highest polling numbers? Trump and Hillary Clinton. It's because they're visible. People tend to say they'll vote for the candidate that they see the most often. They typically don't vote for the candidate that they never get to see. It's why you'll see candidates moving up and down. For instance, a candidate like Ben Carson, super visible, late fall of this last year. Hasn't been as visible, kind of started to get some negative attention, started to change up his campaign a little bit. His polling numbers have been sinking because we don't see him. You have to be able to see them, and it's the hardest thing for a candidate to do. Taking the public pulse is a really big thing. Tracking polls, we're doing a ton of tracking polls. We're trying to see, what are you talking about? What's the issues? Do we talk about immigration now? Do we talk about education now? What are people talking about? What do they need to hear? What does the candidate need to say to look like they're on top of everything? Focus groups, this would be a small group of individuals that are called together by a campaign. A political consultant will come in and they'll say, how do you feel about the current education system? What do you think we should do? They're jotting all of those things down, and they're going to send those words to the candidate and try and get the candidate to say those things. They're trying to pull in different groups of people, and one of the ways they do that is through a focus group. And then the media, it's huge. It's absolutely huge. The more media you have, the more visibility you have, the stronger you have of winning. It's why when people are always like, why is Donald Trump getting all of this popularity? It's because he's in the news every single day. He has mastered that. He has figured out how to be in the headlines every single day. Now, maybe he's in those headlines for not good things, but he's in the headlines, and that's all that matters. Okay, campaign finance. This is my least favorite part of, government. It's difficult. It's hard to understand. There are a lot of caveats. It's gone back and forth and back and forth. And so one of the things I'm going to really stress to you is try and do the best you can to learn about this, understand it. I've seen some FRQs come out in regards to campaign finance. I think it's one of those things where the AP test is really trying to see what is your advanced knowledge. So any chance that you can get to kind of become more familiar with this, the better. So the first time we start to see some regulation on campaign finance happens in 1939 with the Hatch Act. And this is really the idea of limiting contributions of political activities of government employees, and for those groups to spend, it prohibits them from spending more than $3 million on any campaign, and it limits an individual contribution to $5,000. Some people will say, why don't we have a lot of campaign finance before 1939? It's because we didn't need it. You didn't need to buy a ton of TV ad buy when there wasn't a TV. You didn't need to worry about traveling across the country because they didn't do that. In 1939, we start to see elections become more and more vast. They need more and more money. And so we start to see groups start to contribute a lot more money. We see some, this kind of evens out really for a number of years until 1974. In 1974, they create what we call the Federal Election Commission, called the FEC. They monitor all of the campaign contributions from parties and political organizations to candidates. They make sure everything is done legally. They publish all of those things. They keep records of all of those things. The further reforms also require disclosure. So in a lot of areas, if you contribute money to a campaign or a political party, you often have to disclose your employer. Sometimes you have to disclose some other pieces of information. It gives more transparency to where that money is coming from. Buckley versus Valeo is a Supreme Court case, though, that states it is unconstitutional to restrict in any way the amount congressional candidates can spend on their own behalf. So one of the things here is that typically people who run for office have businesses that are very lucrative. And so it became this question of, if I'm a candidate and I have a good deal of money, can I put it towards my campaign? Or do I have to keep using it for myself? And so Buckley versus Valeo sort of decides that you can contribute whatever money you want to as an individual to your candidacy, if that's what you feel like you need to do. Which means that you'll often see candidates will form contributions to themselves before they officially announce, and then they just take that money and put it into their campaign once they have announced their candidacy. There are two terms kind of in this area that I need you to know: the difference between hard money and soft money. So hard money is a political contribution and campaign spending that is recorded under the regulations set forth by the FEC. So hard money is money that's out there that everybody knows, this is where it's going, this is the candidate that's going to, this is the group that's giving it. That's what we call hard money. It's very directive. If I give money to Rachel Fight's campaign for president, that is hard money. I'm giving it directly to her. I'm recording it. It has a specific purpose. I want it for her presidential campaign. I don't want it anywhere else, okay? The second is what we call soft money. And soft money is campaign contributions that are unregulated by the federal or state law. And they're usually given to parties or party committees to help fund general party activities. So say Rachel Fight is a Democrat, and I submit my money to the Democratic Party and I say, please use this for your presidential candidates. I know it's going to go to Rachel, but I'm not sending it straight to Rachel, so it's considered soft money. It means it doesn't have to be regulated. It doesn't have to be documented. It doesn't have to be disclosed. I can just give my soft money to the general party activities. I can also do that in issues. We call this issue advocacy. If I feel really strongly about like the environmental, I can give soft money, where I'll say, you know, I would like this money to go towards sort of just like an ad buy on the issues of the environment. And I can actually even give that to Rachel in some ways. And what she'll do as a candidate she'll use it as a campaign, but she's not going to specifically like say, I will do this. She'll say like, you know, climate change is becoming a bigger and bigger issue, and on the commercial there'll be this like, you know, smokestack giving off all this pollution, and they'll go through it, and then, you know, they'll say, Rachel Fight has voted 14 times against, you know, unregulated distribution of pollution and blah, 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 and then they'll probably say something about the other candidate. It's not essentially a campaign ad for her, but it is. But it's considered soft money because I'm giving it for an issue, not to a candidate. It's kind of hard to describe, but. So we see a lot of soft money come out of political action committees, because political action committees, remember, are the money tree of an interest group. And so when an interest group, obviously they have a strong interest on an issue, when they want to give money to a candidate to make that issue a big deal, they can kind of consider that soft money, because they're not giving it directly to the candidate, they're giving it in the issue, and the candidate uses that money. So we call that issue advocacy advertising. And then the last term here on your on this slide is called a super PAC. This is a political committee that can accept unlimited contributions from individuals and corporations to spend supporting a candidate as long as his efforts are not coordinated with the candidate's own campaign. So a super PAC is also often groups of PACs together, and they tend to send money, again, through issue advocacy, not specifically to a candidate. Okay, so campaign financing beyond the limits. Your book has this really cool line that I love, and it says, campaign finance is sort of like playing a human whack-a-mole. That every time they put a campaign finance regulation on, all the interest groups, PACs, super PACs, all go and try and find the next way to get around that rule. So then we try and control that one, and then they find another one. The idea is that campaign finance is the way that super PACs and PACs and interest groups survive. It's why they're important. And so every time we make a new regulation, they're going to go and try and find a new way to get around it, because they have to survive. And it is the way that they survive. So within a few years of these contributions, new ways were sort of thought up. Contributions to political parties, candidates, PACs, and political parties found ways to generate soft money, again, through campaign contributions so that they didn't have to record them. They also started up what we call independent expenditures. These are non-regulated contributions from PACs and organizations and individuals. They aren't regulated because they are spent on activities they're not coordinated with a candidate. So sort of the idea of issues or, we would like to see candidates in our state, so we will give you money for that activity. We're not necessarily endorsing you. We're just bringing extra money to your campaign for other expenditures. And then again, issue advocacy, spending unregulated funds on advertising that promotes positions on issues rather than the candidate. And these are becoming more and more popular. We're starting to see more campaigns based on issues. And that's a good thing and a bad thing. It's a good thing because the issues should be what makes your decision. The bad thing is that when someone's secretly campaigning behind an issue, you're not always getting the most correct information. So an ad that's going to have something very, very specific about an issue that's sort of geared towards a candidate will probably favor that candidate in some way, shape, or form. Okay, bipartisan campaign reform. This is big. This happens in 2002, and it's written by Russ Feingold, who's our Wisconsin senator, which is awesome, and John McCain. It's called bipartisan. Russ Feingold's a Democrat, John McCain is a Republican, and they come together to write some new elements in the world of campaign finance. They banned large, unlimited contributions to national political parties considered soft money. So they start to put some more restrictions on this idea of soft money. However, again, just like the whack-a-mole idea, interest groups and PACs run and find a new way, and this is where we see the rise of 527s. 527s are the code that you would register a nonprofit organization. Nonprofit organizations are not regulated. So a church, a charity, a group that isn't, looking to make any money. They're just there to get the issue out and to do good things. We start to see interest groups form a 527. So maybe, the Humane Society, well, they're kind of nonprofit already. I'm trying to think, like the NRA might make a 527. They're just a nonprofit. They're there for information, and then they get to send money to a candidate without having to be regulated. A lot of this changes, though, in the Citizens United versus FEC ruling from the Supreme Court. And it basically says that corporations, unions, groups, and others can spend money in campaign advertising without a limit as long as it's not coordinated with a campaign, because it's considered your freedom of speech. And so since the FEC versus Citizens United case has come out, lots of things have changed. There are a lot of corporations that send a great deal of money to candidates. And again, they say it's because we have the right to sort of send our support, and if we want to do that financially, we should be able to do that without limitations, because that's kind of our freedom of expression in what we support. There are two sides to each coin, so there are some people who believe that it's not considered freedom of speech because normally you use money just to buy goods and things that you need. You're not usually making a statement, but I can see both sides of it. So that's where we are right now. These two people, you should know them. These are the Koch brothers. Charles Koch's on the left, and his brother David Koch owned a corporation called Koch Company. You've probably seen their commercials. They manufacture a lot of things. They're all over the country. Safety equipment, manufacturing equipment, home goods, things like that. They have billions of dollars, and they've donated billions of those dollars to causes and candidates. And typically they're sending those to conservative causes and conservative candidates. However, I did watch, and if we have time, I'll show it to you. Charles Koch, the man on the left, did an interview with CBS Sunday Morning a number of months ago. And the interviewer kind of asked him, he said, would you ever send money to a liberal candidate or a liberal cause? And he said, if it did my company good, yeah, I would do that. That he sort of said, I choose the candidate that's going to do the best for me in what I do for a living. And so typically that has been a conservative candidate. But he said if there was a liberal candidate that tended to do something for him, he would do that. So that statement is, you know, if you read between the lines, it's very important. He's choosing candidates that do him good, that do his massive billion-dollar company good. It means that he has a lot of pull with the candidates that he supports. Again, it's sort of that election before the election. These two men choose people who are going to be able to support what they need. And so you'll see that come out in what that candidate says. One of the things that you have probably heard is that the Koch brothers did a great deal of support for Scott Walker when he ran for re-election, especially in the recall election. And again, you have to understand that although they're not forcing Scott Walker to do anything he doesn't want to do, Scott Walker needs these guys in order to continue on in his campaign, and so he's going to be listening to them. He's going to be trying to do the things that they need him to do. And so these people have a lot of power, and they're often behind the curtain and not always super visible. The Koch brothers have actually been very visible, but it's important. There are a lot of people like this. It's not just these two guys. However, they get a lot of flack because they are really out in the public. But most people who aren't like them tend to stay really kind of back. They don't like to get a lot of attention. George Soros is a millionaire financier who donates a lot of money to liberal causes. Again, not as popular as Koch brothers, but he is very much in the public and giving a lot of support to groups and candidates. Okay, reforming primaries. So the primary, a presidential, running for president is a pretty long campaign. What happens first is a primary election where states sort of vote in how they think or what candidate they think is the best candidate. We call these beauty contests because they don't really do anything yet. If Iowa comes out in favor of Marco Rubio, it's not that he's really won anything. He just gets to say that that state is kind of in his favor. And that helps because the more momentum he can build, the more states that vote in his favor, the odds are better that he'll get the nomination from his party further down the line. So primaries are kind of the places where presidents are trying to get, or presidential candidates are trying to get that momentum running. Primaries tend to kind of weed out the top and the bottom. Primaries are expensive, or running in states with primaries are expensive. And so as candidates tend not to win primaries, they'll start to drop out of the race because they're not getting money. You'll see lots of finances will start coming into the candidates who are winning those primaries. And so it's really important for candidates to win states like Iowa and New Hampshire and South Carolina because those are the first few states of the primaries. And if they can build that momentum, they can get more financial support. We have primaries all throughout time. Like there are some states that do it all on one separate day. Like Iowa gets to be the first. They do a caucus. Then we have also something called Super Tuesday, and that's when a lot of states have their primary all on the same day. It's a pretty good day. Front-loading primaries, we're starting to see it. Primaries are getting earlier and earlier and earlier. Candidates want that. They want to build that momentum earlier and earlier. The problem is that now it's kind of stretching things out. Iowa does get to be the first state. I don't know why. I should really look that up. And then it goes to New Hampshire, and then to South Carolina, and then kind of on down through all of the states. The National Convention will be next. They'll seat all the delegates, so there's a credentials committee that decides which delegates from states will be coming to the National Convention, and they sort of support the state and they announce which candidate that state will be kind of nominating. Okay, we have